Welcome to our second look at the large warship unveiled by President Donald Trump. In late December 2025, the naval community focused on the headline controversy, the return of the so-called Battleship to the US Navy in the form of the Trump class. We pondered the unprecedented size of the proposed vessel and the deep uncertainty surrounding the US Navy's ability to deliver such a program after a decade of acquisition failures. In the second video on the topic, we will try to do the program more justice. We'll try to understand its motivations from the perspective of Trump and his team. We focus on why the US Navy may find the ship useful in certain situations, and what strategic gaps the Trump class is intended to fill. In doing so, it becomes clearer that the Trump class is not just about nostalgia or naval prestige. It's also about solving certain problems the Navy has struggled with for decades. The first of these is how to go on the offensive against enemy ships without using carrier airpower, not just to defend and defend and defend. According to Secretary of the Navy John Phelan, the Iowa was designed to go on the attack with the biggest guns, and that's exactly what will define the Trump-class battleships. Offensive firepower from the biggest guns of our era. This ship isn't just to swat the arrows, it's going to reach out and kill the archers. Phelan's comparison between the Trump class and the Iowa-class battleship is revealing. The Iowa was never just about armor. It was about overwhelming offensive reach. The Iowa class could deliver decisive, long-range firepower, at least long-range for the time. When Phelan argues that the Trump class isn't just to swat the arrows, it's going to reach out and kill the archers, he is articulating a long-standing but rarely stated constraint facing the US Navy. For decades, American surface combatants have been optimized primarily for defense, air defense, ballistic missile defense, anti-submarine warfare, and the protection of high-value units such as aircraft carriers and amphibious ships. Their offensive anti-ship firepower, by contrast, is rather low. Today, most Arleigh-Burke-class destroyers carry no long-range anti-ship weapons at all, or at best a small number of interim systems with limited reach, such as the Harpoon cruise missiles. Even the reintroduction of more advanced variants of the Tomahawk with some degree of maritime strike capabilities has not fully closed this gap, particularly against peer adversaries with layered air defenses and long-range sensors. China and Russia, by contrast, have built surface combatants around the assumption that ships must be able to strike first and strike far. Chinese destroyers, like the Type 052D and Type 055, routinely field large numbers of long-range anti-ship cruise missiles like the YJ-18, and increasingly hypersonic weapons in the form of the YJ-20. Russian surface combatants, though fewer in number and smaller in size, emphasize extreme offensive punch through missiles designed to overwhelm defenses, like the supersonic Onyx and the hypersonic Zircon missiles. The Russians focus far less on defense compared to the Americans and the Chinese. This is the imbalance Phelan is pointing to. Existing US destroyers and cruisers are exceptionally good at intercepting incoming threats, but far less capable of eliminating the platforms launching these threats. In a high-end conflict, this forces the Navy to rely heavily on carrier aviation and attack submarines to kill the attackers, or the archers, so to speak, while American destroyers absorb and manage the defensive burden. The Trump class is explicitly designed to make the American counterattack at sea more flexible. The vessel will have powerful offensive cruise missiles of their own, and will no longer have to rely on carrier aviation to perform the offensive function. At the center of this rebalancing is the conventional prompt strike weapon. Well often discussed in the context of land attack and strategic deterrence, its inclusion on the Trump class points to an intended anti-ship role as well. A large surface combatant equipped with a dozen hypersonic missiles, as currently envisaged on the Trump class, fundamentally changes the threat calculus for enemy naval forces. Unlike traditional anti-ship cruise missiles, hypersonic weapons compress reaction times, complicate tracking, and challenge even the most advanced defensive systems. When launched from a surface platform with long-range sensors, cooperative targeting, and network support from unmanned systems, these missiles become very dangerous offensive instruments. This is what distinguishes the Trump class from simply being a bigger destroyer. Its offensive capacity is not an afterthought or niche capability. It is central to the concept. The ship is intended to hunt high-value enemy vessels, hold adversary naval forces at risk over vast areas, and impose operational constraints on the enemy that current US surface combatants cannot. In this sense, the biggest guns of our era are not naval artillery, but supersonic and hypersonic long-range missiles designed to strike before the enemy can respond. The rhetoric may reference dreadnought battleships, but the reality for the Trump class is offensive firepower based around over-the-horizon weapons. The Trump class can also be understood as the functional successor to a naval program that quietly died more than a decade ago, the CGX. The CGX program emerged in the late 2000s as a proposed next-generation guided missile cruiser intended to replace the aging Ticonderoga class. It was envisioned as a large, powerful surface combatant with significant missile capacity and the ability to serve as both an air defense commander and a land attack platform. Early concepts ranged widely in size, but many clustered around displacements well above the existing Ticonderoga class. CGX was ultimately cancelled due to rising cost, technical risk, and changing priorities. In its place, the Navy doubled down on the Flight 3 Arleigh-Burke destroyers, upgrading radars and power generation, but retaining a hull originally designed decades earlier. This solved the immediate air defense problems, but left elder gaps, such as missile capacity, inadequately addressed. The Trump class resurrects many of the CGX's ambitions, albeit under a different name and in a more radical form. Like the CGX, it's intended to host the most powerful radar in the fleet, the AN-SPY-6 Air and Missile Defense Radar, an active, electronically scanned array based around gallium nitride semiconductors. The ship will also have the AN/SLQ-32V7 Electronic Warfare Improvement Program, Block 3, an electronic warfare suite that has been gradually fitted onto the Navy's Arleigh-Burke destroyers. This will provide the battleship with an advantage in the unseen domain of electronic warfare, including electronic attack and electronic protection measure. These would allow the Trump class to command complex air defense and ballistic missile defense operations, deal with a large number of targets at the same time, and manage different layers of air defense for both itself and other American ships. Like CGX, it aims to deploy directed energy weapons or future iterations of such weapons as they become available. The battleship is designed with 2 laser-directed energy weapons in the 300 to 600 kilowatt power range. Additionally, there are 4 lower-powered AN/SEQ-4 optical dazzling interdictors, otherwise known as Odin. They are designed not to cause physical damage, but to simply blind the optical systems and the vision of adversarial warships, and also blind any optical seekers on incoming missiles or drones. Most cruise missiles use active radar seekers, so the Odin's use case against anti-ship missiles will be quite niche. But drones, on the other hand, can quite often rely on optical sensors. Aside from lasers, other point defense systems include 4 30mm autocannons, 2 rolling airframe missile launchers, and 2 counter-drone systems. Crucially, as we said before, the Trump class goes further than conventional cruisers by explicitly embracing long-range offensive strikes as a primary mission. Where CGX was often framed as a defensive and command and control platform, the Trump class is unapologetically offensive. In effect, it combines the unrealized cruiser ambitions of CGX with the strike capacity of an arsenal ship. Another aspect that deserves attention is the Trump class's intended operational independence. The Navy has emphasized that the ship can operate alone, as part of a carrier strike group, or as the flagship of a surface action group. This flexibility matters. In a distributed maritime operations framework, the ability to deploy powerful surface units independently complicates adversary planning. A Trump-class ship operating forward, supported by unmanned systems and off-board sensors, could exert influence disproportionate to its numbers. It would not require a carrier overhead to be credible, nor would it be relegated solely to escort duties. Just think about the sorties against Allied convoys during World War II by individual German capital ships with minimal escorts or acting completely alone. German battleships like the Scharnhorst, the Gneisenau, and the Tirpitz, and the heavy cruiser Graf Spee wreaked havoc on Allied convoys through the early to the middle stages of the war. We could see the Trump-class battleship operate in a similar way, either alone or in small surface action groups, against merchant shipping in lightly contested waters. This again echoes cruiser logic rather than battleship tradition. Historically, cruisers were the Navy's independent operators, showing the flag, conducting strikes, and controlling sea lanes. The Trump class could revive this role in the age of missiles. When viewed in a comparative context, the proposed Trump-class battleship fits squarely into an emerging category of extra-large and high-value surface combatants that includes Russia's upgraded Kirov-class battlecruiser and China's Type 055 large destroyer. Despite the difference in doctrine, propulsion, and official classification, all 3 designs converge on a rather similar operational concept. A heavily armed surface combatant equipped with the most capable radars and hypersonic missiles designed to act as an air defense command ship and long-range strike platform. The closest conceptual analog to the Trump is arguably Russia's Admiral Nakhimov following her modernization. The Nakhimov is a Kirov-class nuclear battlecruiser. At roughly 28,000 tons, the Kirov class already has a scale far beyond conventional destroyers. Its refit replaced the legacy P-700 Granite missiles with a vast universal vertical launching system reportedly totaling 174 cells, enabling the carriage of Caliber, Onyx, and the hypersonic Zircon missiles. This gives the ship a formidable anti-ship and land attack reach, explicitly intended to threaten high-value targets such as aircraft carriers and surface action groups. In parallel, the Kirov's layered air defense, including navalized S-400 interceptors, allows it to function as a mobile air defense bastion and fleet's flagship. In role and armament, the Trump class closely mirrors this concept, but scales it even further. A larger hull, a reported 128 VRS cells integrated into a more modern combat system, and a strong emphasis on hypersonic conventional prompt strike weapons for long-range offensive action. The Type 055 large destroyer represents the Chinese variant of the same idea, albeit optimized for mass production and integration into a much larger fleet architecture. At approximately 12,000 tons, the Type 055 is significantly smaller than both the Kirov and the Trump class, but it is nonetheless one of the most heavily armed surface combatants in service. Its 112 universal VRS cells can accommodate long-range air defense missiles, supersonic cruise missiles, and hypersonic missiles in the form of the YJ-20. Combined with the Type 346B ASAR radar, one of the most powerful shipborne radar systems currently employed, the Type 055 functions as an air defense command ship and a strike platform against enemy surface forces. In Chinese doctrine, it provides the teeth of a surface warfare formation, particularly in contested environments where carrier aviation may be constrained. Where the Trump class distinguishes itself is not in concept, but in scale and ambition. At over 35,000 tons, it would exceed both the Kirov and the Type 055 by a substantial margin, allowing greater space for supplies and crew habitation, greater endurance in long voyages, greater missile magazines, and expanded command and control facilities. Its planned integration of hypersonic weapons parallels the Russian Zircon and the Chinese YJ-20 in function, explicitly aligning with Secretary of the Navy Phelan's framing of killing the archers, rather than merely intercepting incoming threats. In this sense, the Trump class represents an American answer to capabilities that Russia and China already field. A surface combatant that can independently project decisive offensive firepower while simultaneously orchestrating air and missile defense for an entire naval force. Taken together, the Trump class can be understood as a larger, more powerful, and more centralized evolution of the same design philosophy embodied by the upgraded Kirov and the Type 055. All of this, however, collides with an unavoidable reality: the US Navy's recent track record in designing and building new ships. The Zumwalt-class destroyers were meant to revolutionize surface warfare through stealth, automation, and advanced gun systems. Instead, they were plagued by cost overruns, cancelled weapons, and immature systems. The Littoral Combat Ship program promised numbers, flexibility, and affordability. It's delivered fragility, limited combat power, and early retirement. The Constellation-class frigate was supposed to be a return to basics, leveraging an existing design to avoid past mistakes. Yet, even this program stumbled under the weight of design changes and workforce constraints. Against this backdrop, a 35,000-ton surface combatant packed with cutting-edge systems is an extraordinary ask. The Navy is proposing to act as the lead design authority, integrate hypersonic weapons, develop an advanced electric power architecture, preserve margins for future technologies, and do so within a shipbuilding industrial base already stretched thin. Even if the design itself is sound, execution remains the central question. Despite the dramatic rollout of the Trump-class design and confident public rhetoric from President Trump himself, the reality tells a far more cautious and arguably troubling story. Trump suggested that work on the first two ships would begin, quote, almost immediately, and take roughly 2.5 years. However, according to Navy officials cited by the war zone, the actual construction of the first two ships is not expected to begin until the early 2030s. This is not a minor discrepancy. It represents a gap of nearly a decade between political messaging and industrial reality. According to the Navy, the Trump class, formerly designated BBG-X, is still in the very early design phase. The service is preparing to award contracts for preliminary design work and engineering analysis, not for construction. These design efforts alone are expected to take 72 months or 6 years. Even if these contracts were awarded immediately and went according to schedule, they would run well into the early 2030s before steel is cut. In other words, the program is following a conventional, slow acquisition pathway, not the accelerated schedule Trump has suggested. Bath Iron Works and Huntington Ingalls Industries, the only two US shipyards with experience building large surface combatants, are slated to handle shipbuilder design and engineering work. Gibbs & Cox, a long-established naval architecture firm, will support the Navy's in-house design team during early-stage systems engineering and requirements definition. Notably, all of this work is sole-sourced, where only one supplier can provide the product and service, underlining how narrow and overstretched the US shipbuilding industrial base has become. The contradiction between political claims and Navy planning and shipbuilding resources raises valid questions about the program's credibility. The concept is already outlandish, but the fundamental mismatch between Trump's ambitions and the limited capacity of shipyards to deliver within his timeframe is the biggest cause for concern. Anonymous sources interviewed by the media indicated that the Trump-class battleship will replace the planned DDG-X. From my understanding, this has yet to be confirmed by the US Navy or by President Trump himself, but it would not be surprising. If true, the supplanting of DDG-X raises questions about whether the Navy is abandoning incremental evolution in favor of yet another high-risk leap. To place this discussion in context, it is worth briefly clarifying the role of the Trump class. Despite the battleship label, the Trump class does not resemble historical battleships in design or role. It lacks heavy armor, relies on missiles rather than large-caliber guns for offensive firepower, and is built around sensors, networks, and command functions rather than survivability through sheer mass. In functional terms, it aligns far more closely with a very large guided missile cruiser. Whether or not one accepts the battleship label or the large cruiser label, the Trump class represents an attempt to address real deficiencies in US surface warfare, particularly in offensive anti-ship capability. Its displacement, reportedly at or exceeding 35,000 tons, would make it the largest US surface combatant since the Second World War, surpassing even the Zumwalt class by a wide margin. The size is driven by the need for power generation, cooling, weapons capacity, and future growth. However, as some have pointed out, the total number of the Mark 41 vertical launching system cells, 128 cells in total, seems rather low for a ship of this size. For comparison, the Flights 2A and Flight 3 Arleigh Burkes, at less than 1/3 of the Trump's displacement, have 96 VLAir cells. Part of the discrepancy reflects the inclusion of the 12 conventional prompt strike hypersonic missiles, which should require additional cells of their own. But this still does not fully explain the low number of conventional VLAir cells. The Trump-class battleship, or large cruiser, is best understood not solely as a revival of the past, but as a reaction to the present. It reflects a navy grappling with peer competition, missile-centric warfare, and the limits of existing platforms designed for a different era. Its emphasis on killing the Archer is a tacit admission that defensive capability alone is no longer sufficient. The Navy needs to get over its reliance on carrier air power for offensive punch. Whether this ambition can be translated into steel, systems, and operational reality remains deeply uncertain. The capability gap it addresses is real. But the US Navy's recent history suggests that ambition and delivery are two very different things. In that tension lies the true story of the Trump class, not as a battleship reborn, but as a large cruiser that can take the fight to the enemy, while also reigniting industrial capacity for shipbuilding at home. That's the big idea. We'll see if it happens.